initially to the West Wing to discuss my ideas with Larry Summers and Gina Sperling, and at the end of that year to be invited to speak at the White House, something that I found incredible of the open-mindedness of the American people. You see, to invite a citizen of Chile to share his experience about Social Security with 600 of the leaders of America speaks so highly of your country and shows why you are the greatest or the most successful nation on earth. But at the same time, I was looking for the next presidents, as I am doing now, incidentally, and I was trying to look for them. So I went to see a lot of prospective candidates, and among others, there was this governor of Texas who, so through a common friend, he invited me to Austin, and we had a 2-hour discussion about this. I can tell you that he made very good questions. He understood the concept of ownership. He didn't went into the details of the recognition bond or the transition financing, but he understood the essence. And I still remember that he said, "This is so American, Jose. How could you have done it in Chile before the United States?" And I said, "Mr. Governor, there are historical circumstances, but we can do it in the U.S. if you take this issue." And he promised me that if he were to run for president someday, he said no at that moment, he would take the issue. And I believe he was a man of his words. Whatever you may think of him, Democrat, Republican, he was a man of his words. He ran on that on 2000, and then 9/11, and then last year he introduced the idea in a State of the Union address. And that is extraordinary. For the first time, the creation of a personal retirement account system in the U.S. was in a State of the Union. Now, many things happened. The first one was, in my view, a strategic mistake. Some people in the government convinced the president that he should at the same time create personal accounts, something that is positive, something that is joy to the people, and solve the unfunded liability problem, the fact that the old system is bankrupt. So, as you may know, he introduced a very complex idea called progressive indexing that at the end of the day means cutting promised benefit, not benefit, but promised benefit. But of course, the next day, a lot of the press, the headline was, the president proposed to cut benefits. When I saw that headline in the New York Times, I said, the reform is dead. You see, how can you reform something if you promise to cut benefits? I believe that those two reforms should be done separately. I believe you can create personal accounts in one initiative, and in another one, and clearly again, there has to be a bipartisan commission proposing it, like when you close military bases or things like that. You see, all of them should agree so that they cannot criticize themselves. And another problem is, what do you do with the unfunded liability, the solvency problem? In Chile, I did them in a sequence, but never at the same time. You cannot sell two huge, complex, difficult ideas at the same time. There is the ABC of marketing even. But here, in my view, the discussion was so confusing. Some people really did not understand what was exactly the president proposal. Second, and something that has surprised me enormously, is that I believe that for any great reform or initiative, you need a man in charge. You needed Dwight Eisenhower for D-Day. I just saw the film about Eisenhower. You need a commander-in-chief of the initiative, a Mr. Social Security. Who was it? Nobody. See, the president cannot, with a war in Iraq, with a war on terror, with Katrina, with the enormous demand on his time, his energy, his sleep, also be the Mr. Social Security. And I was really astonished to see that there was no member of the cabinet who was appointed or took upon himself the role of going every week in front of the American people, going to 200 cities, going to every forum in the country as Mr. or Mrs., incidentally, Mrs. Social Security. And third, I believe that you have a problem that is very difficult, and I cannot enter into that. I do not have the information, but about the war on terrorism and Iraq and all that. It is extremely difficult to wage such a complex situation and to manage it and to do something like this. I can imagine a president every day, you see, being briefed about the casualties and the bombings and the elections in Iraq and the Congress and the Middle East and Afghanistan. And how can he say, okay, and now forget all that and I will think about... It's extremely difficult, I must confess that. So, honestly, I was not surprised, but I believe it was a great step forward because the conversation began. The president mentioned in the State of the Union. The New York Times asked me for a full-page op-ed to explain my view. An op-ed columnist of the New York Times, John Tierney, bought my idea, went to Chile, and has written 3 very good pieces. One reporter wrote a very bad piece. Well, but that is the conversation in a democracy. So I believe we are in the right track, and it will take some time. I only hope you do it before the Titanic hit the iceberg, because to transfer passengers from one ship to another is always difficult in high seas. But let me tell you that it's much more difficult to do it once you have hit the iceberg. Another question? Thank you.
We've at least started the debate in the U.S. Is there any prospect that they'll start the debate in Europe before they hit the iceberg?
Well, that is a very good question. First of all, we have to divide 2 Europes. But now, I do not use the Rumsfeld line of old and new Europe because I have nothing against old Europe. I love Venice and Paris. So maybe Rumsfeld doesn't like it, but I believe they are very romantic cities. I divide Europe in funded and unfunded Europe. The countries of the former Central and Eastern Europe, all of them, are moving in the direction of personal account. I have been personally many times in them, and I have consulted with President and Prime Minister. And can I tell you that Poland already has a system, Hungary has a system. Last year, Slovakia began it. I was a month ago in Estonia, in Lithuania. I am going next month to Croatia. Even a country that will become independent on May the 1st, Montenegro, part of Serbia and Montenegro, they are not yet a country, but they already have been to Chile to study the Chilean pension system, and I am visiting Podgorica in order to help them because of the birth of a country. So there are 20 countries in Central Eastern Europe doing this, so that is clear. The difficulty is in the core of the European Union. You see, there is this welfare state mentality, especially in France, Germany, and Italy, and it's extremely difficult. Of course, I am invited by universities, by private companies, but not yet by the political elites. The political elites do not even want to touch the issue. They don't even want to discuss. They don't even want to say that it exists. That is, they don't want to tell the passengers, that the workers, that they are passengers in the Titanic. Now, I believe that there are 2 elements that will bring the issue to the table in the next 5 years. One is the enlargement of the European Union. That is, when they were only the old European Union countries, they didn't have the competition from the other side. But now you see that they have a tax competition, pension competition, basically economic policy competition. You know, a lot of companies in Germany are relocating to Prague, to Bratislava. After all, it's so close. And they can have a much less regulation, taxes, and better pension system for their workers. That is an element in the cost structure. So all the countries are competing. You know the famous story that how the French complained against the Polish plumbers, and they voted no for the EU constitution because the Polish plumbers were going to take their jobs. Well, they are very much afraid, and I believe that that will happen in the next years. What is going on in Central Eastern Europe is fascinating. I go once and again. After all, those people have suffered so much for so long that it's really an enormous satisfaction for me to be able to make a little difference in Zagreb, in Prague, in Budapest, or in Warsaw. Second, the monetary union. You see, they went toward a common currency. It is very debatable among economists whether it's good or bad. I will not enter that discussion, but they do have a common currency and one central bank. Now, why I have connected this issue